The knock came at 2:17 inches the morning. I know the exact time because I had been watching the clock on my phone, the way you do when sleep refuses to come and there is nothing left to do but count the minutes until the parking lot gets light enough to feel less like the end of everything. The Walmart on Morse Road in Columbus stays open all night, and the security guard had let me park in the far corner 3 nights in a row without saying anything. I figured tonight would be the night that changed. I was right. The flashlight swept across the back window first, then found my face through the driver's side glass. I sat up slowly, my lower back screaming the way it always does now, and I pressed the button to roll down the window halfway. Cold October air hit me like a wall. "Sir." The security guard was a young black man, maybe 25, his uniform a size too big across the shoulders. He held the flashlight low, not in my face, which I noticed and appreciated. "I'm going to need to see some ID." I reached into the glove compartment without arguing. There is no dignity in arguing when you are 63 years old and your address is a Ford F-150 with a cracked dashboard and 3 days of fast food wrappers on the passenger seat. I handed him my license. Robert Calloway, Columbus, Ohio. The address on it was the house on West Haven Drive that I had not been inside in 14 months. He took the license back to his little guard station near the entrance, and I sat in the dark and waited. The cold was settling into my knees, that deep arthritis ache that starts in the joint and spreads outward like a slow fire. I turned the engine on for the heat and watched a woman in scrubs walk out of the store pushing a cart with 2 bags in it, her shift probably just ending, going home to somewhere warm. I used to be that person. The one going home. I had been a civil engineer for 31 years. Not famous, not wealthy in any flashy way, but comfortable. My partner and I had built Callaway Weston Engineering from a 2-desk operation above a dry cleaner on 5th Avenue into a real firm with 12 employees and contracts with 3 county governments. My partner Gary and I had shaken hands on everything important before we ever signed a piece of paper. I had known him since we were both 26 years old, both young and hungry, both convinced we were going to build something that mattered. I had known my wife Patricia since we were 29, 22 years of marriage, 2 guest bedrooms that our kids never used because we never had any, which was a grief that lived quietly between us for a long time and then, somewhere around year 12, just became part of the furniture. We stopped talking about it. We stopped talking about a lot of things. I was always working. I know that. I have never pretended otherwise. Patricia told me once, early in the marriage, that she felt like she was having a conversation with a man who was always standing halfway out the door, and I nodded and said I understood and went back to the project I was reviewing. I am not telling this to excuse what she did. I am telling it because it is honest, and I am 63 years old and I have nothing left to protect, including my own image. What I did not know, for somewhere between 2 and 4 years, depending on whose account you believe, is that my wife and my business partner were sleeping together. What I also did not know is that they had spent approximately 18 months before I found out carefully, methodically, and with considerable legal preparation, arranging to destroy me. Gary had been moving company money. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, filtered through a vendor account he had set up under a name similar enough to a legitimate supplier that our bookkeeper never flagged it. He had also, and I still do not fully understand how this was done without my signature, transferred his ownership interest in Callaway Weston to a new LLC that Patricia was listed as a silent partner in. When everything fell apart, that LLC owned 41% of our firm. I owned the rest, but the rest had been systematically drained. Patricia filed for divorce on a Wednesday in August. That same morning, Gary presented me with a forensic accounting report prepared by a firm I had never heard of, claiming that I had been embezzling from Callaway Weston for 7 years. The numbers were fabricated, but they were fabricated well. My name was on transactions I had never authorized, on accounts I had not known existed, with notes in a version of my handwriting that was close enough to cause real trouble. I hired a lawyer. A good one, or so I thought, until I understood that a good divorce lawyer in Columbus costs money I was rapidly running out of, and that the criminal fraud allegation Gary was threatening to take to the DA was eating everyone's time and attention. My lawyer told me that fighting both simultaneously was going to cost me more than settling one of them. I settled the divorce. I gave Patricia the house, her car, half of what remained in my retirement account after legal fees, and a cash payment that I borrowed against my stake in the company to make. In exchange, Gary dropped the fraud allegations and agreed to buy out my remaining interest in Callaway Weston for a number that was embarrassing but not zero. I signed the papers in a conference room while Gary sat across from me looking at his phone, and Patricia sat beside him without looking at me at all, and I understood then in a way that went past intellectual understanding into something physical, something in the chest, that this had been planned. That the two of them had sat together in some room I was never in and made decisions about my life with the casual confidence of people who already knew how the story ended. I walked out of that conference room with $68,000, a 2009 Ford pickup, and the clothes that were in my gym bag. The $68,000 lasted 8 months. Legal fees took the first third. A security deposit and 3 months' rent on an apartment in Westerville took another piece. Then the apartment lease ended, and the landlord, for reasons I still do not completely understand, declined to renew it. I suspect Patricia knew him. I suspect a lot of things. By October, I had been in the truck for 6 weeks. I had a gym membership at the YMCA on North High Street for the showers. I was eating 1 actual meal a day, usually at the McDonald's on Cleveland Avenue where nobody looked at you twice no matter what you looked like. I had applied for 22 engineering positions and received 3 responses, all of them versions of the same polite email explaining that the position had been filled. At 63, with a resume that showed you had left your own firm under circumstances nobody wanted to explain on a reference call, you are not a desirable candidate. I understood this. Understanding it did not make it easier to sleep in a parking lot in October. The security guard was coming back. He walked differently than he had before. Slower. He had his radio in his hand and he was talking into it, low, and when he reached my window he stopped and looked at me with an expression I could not immediately read. Mr. Callaway, he had stopped calling me sir. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Is there anything going on with you legally, like anything you're aware of? I felt the cold settle harder. I am not in any legal trouble, I said carefully. Not that I know of. No. I don't mean... He stopped, looked at his radio. Hold on a second. He stepped back and had a brief conversation I could mostly not hear, and then he turned back to me. My supervisor is coming out. She just wants to talk to you for a minute. You're not in trouble. His supervisor was a woman in her late 50s, with short gray hair, and the particular way of standing that you see in people who have spent years in law enforcement. She introduced herself as Donna. She asked me to step out of the truck, not in a demanding way, but in the way of someone accustomed to asking for things and receiving them, and I got out and stood in the cold with my arms folded against my chest. Mr. Callaway, she said. When Marcus ran your ID, it triggered an alert from the Franklin County probate court system, a notification flag. That's not something we see often. She paused. It looks like there's been an attempt to locate you. Multiple attempts, going back about 4 years. From an attorney's office. I stared at her. I don't know what that means. It means someone has been trying to find you for a long time and hasn't been able to. She was watching my face carefully. Do you know an attorney named Howard Bellman, out of Dayton? The name meant nothing to me. I shook my head. There's a number listed. She held up her phone. It's almost 2:30 in the morning, so I'm not suggesting you call it right now. But this is not a scam, Mr. Callaway. This came through a verified probate court registry. Someone filed a locate request through official channels. I stood in the Walmart parking lot in Columbus, Ohio, 63 years old, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans I had washed at a laundromat 2 days ago, and tried to think of who in an official capacity would be looking for me and why. My father had died 4 years ago. I knew this only because my cousin Marlene had called me, and that call had come during the worst of the legal battles, when I was barely sleeping and barely eating and barely functioning, and I had said I would come for the service, and then had not come because Gary had filed an emergency motion 2 days before the funeral, and my lawyer said I needed to be in Columbus. I had not called Marlene afterward. I had not done a lot of things I should have done. My father and I had not been close, not since my mother died when I was 40. Not since my father had remarried a woman named Gloria and moved to a farm outside of Piqua that I had visited twice in 15 years. We had ended our phone calls after a minute and a half and wished each other well and not known what to say. I had not known, because I had never asked, what my father had left behind when he died. I called Howard Bellman's office at 8 the next morning from the parking lot of the YMCA, still in the truck, engine running for the heat. A woman answered on the second ring, and when I gave my name, there was a pause that felt significant. "Please hold," she said. "Please hold right now. I'm getting Mr. Bellman." Howard Bellman had a voice like a man who had spent decades delivering both good and bad news and had developed a tone that worked for both. He asked me 3 verification questions: my mother's maiden name, my date of birth, the name of the elementary school I had attended. I answered all 3. There was a longer pause. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "I have been attempting to locate you for 4 years and 2 months. I want to be straightforward with you about why that took so long, and I want to apologize on behalf of my office for the difficulty." He explained it carefully. The way you explain something to a person you suspect may need to sit down. My father's farm in Piqua sat on 112 acres of northwestern Ohio flatland. My father had leased the mineral and surface rights to a wind energy development company in 2009, and that company had installed 14 turbines on the property under a 30-year lease agreement. The lease paid a base annual fee plus a royalty calculated against energy production. In 2019, the year before my father died, the farm had generated $162,000 in lease income. My father had updated his will in 2017. He had left everything to me, not to Gloria, who had passed away in 2016, not to any charity or institution, to me, his only son, Robert James Calloway, in a will that was clear and unambiguous and filed properly with the Miami County Probate Court. Howard Bellman had sent the initial notification of probate to the address he had on file, which was the house on West Haven Drive, the house that Patricia still lived in. He had sent 6 letters to that address over the course of 8 months. He had made phone calls to a number that went to voicemail and was never returned. He had filed a formal locate request through the county system when the estate remained unclaimed at the 2-year mark. Not one of those letters had reached me. I sat in the truck with the phone pressed against my ear, and I thought about Patricia going to the mailbox. Patricia seeing envelopes from an attorney's office in Dayton. Patricia making a decision, each time, about what to do with them. "Mr. Calloway?" Howard Bellman's voice came through the phone carefully. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," I said. "Keep going." The farm had been held in trust pending my location. The lease payments had continued and been held in an interest-bearing estate account. Including 4 years of accrued income and interest, the liquid assets of the estate were now slightly over $640,000. The farm itself, based on a current appraisal, was valued at approximately $3.1 million. The remaining term of the wind lease, with its escalating royalty clauses, had been assessed as an ongoing income stream valued by the energy company's own actuaries at an additional $1.8 million over the remaining life of the contract. Howard Bellman was quiet for a moment after he finished saying the numbers. I think he had done this enough times to know that certain figures require silence after them. "The total estate," he said, pending formal transfer, "is approximately $5.6 million. I had to ask him to repeat it, not because I had not heard it, but because my brain was doing something strange, a kind of refusal, a circuit breaker tripping on a load it was not designed to carry. He repeated it without any impatience. I was sitting in a truck with $40 and a gym membership. I met Howard Bellman in his Dayton office 4 days later. He was a small man in his late 60s with reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose, and the kind of organized desk that tells you someone has been doing the same serious work for a very long time. He spread the documents across a conference table and walked me through each one, and I sat there in the only clean button-down shirt I owned and tried to understand that my father, a man I had not spoken to properly in years, a man I had not gone to bury, had left me everything he had without condition or qualification. I found out later, from my cousin Marlene, that my father had called me 3 times in the last year of his life, that he had spoken to Patricia each time. That Patricia had told him each time that I was unavailable and would call him back. I did not call him back, because I did not know he had called. The estate attorney filed the transfer paperwork. He also, on my behalf and with my authorization, filed a report with the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office, detailing the pattern of mail interception. Howard Bellman had kept every envelope he had sent, every delivery confirmation, every returned letter marked with Patricia's signature. The documentation was, in his word, thorough. The prosecutor's office did not move quickly. Legal offices rarely do, but they moved. Patricia was charged with obstruction of a probate proceeding and mail fraud, both of which carry weight in Ohio. Her attorney, and I noted with satisfaction that she could no longer afford Mitchell, the expensive one, negotiated a plea that included restitution, probation, and a civil judgment in my favor for damages related to the estate delay. Gary Weston I handled separately. With money now, with a real attorney and time to be thorough, I went back through everything. The forensic accountant I hired was a former FBI examiner named Sandra, who wore practical shoes and asked questions with the patience of someone who already knew the answers. She found the vendor account. She found the LLC. She found 3 years of transactions that established, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the fraud Gary had accused me of was the fraud Gary had committed, reflected through a mirror. Gary's attorney called mine on a Tuesday and asked about settlement terms. I told my attorney I was not interested in settlement terms. Gary was charged. He pled guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of filing a false report with intent to harm. He lost his engineering license. The firm, Callaway Weston Engineering, which had by then been renamed Weston Infrastructure Group, was forced into civil litigation that consumed most of its remaining value. I did not want the firm back. I want to be clear about that. Some people assumed I would rebuild it, reclaim it, put my name back on the door. I did not want any of that. What I had built with Gary Weston was built with Gary Weston, and whatever it had been, it was gone. You cannot unmix something. What I wanted, and what took longer than the money and the legal outcomes to find, was harder to nate. I bought a house in Granville, about 40 miles east of Columbus, a small college town with wide streets and old trees and a particular quality of light in the afternoons that I cannot fully describe. The house had a front porch and a garage and a second bedroom that I turned into a study where I kept my drafting table, the old manual one I had worked on before everything went digital, because sometimes I still think better with a pencil than a mouse. My father had a photograph in his study, the one that Marlene sent me after I finally called her, and we talked for 2 hours and cried a little and apologized to each other for years of silence. In the photograph, my father is standing in front of the farmhouse in Pequot, maybe 1987, and I am next to him, maybe 17, and we are both squinting into the sun with the same expression on our faces. The same slight frown. The same set to the jaw. I had not known until I was 63 years old, holding a photograph, how much I looked like him. I hung it in the study, next to the drafting table. I go back to Pequot twice a year now to walk the farm. The turbines are enormous, up close in a way that photographs do not convey, these slow white giants turning in the Ohio wind. And I stand in the middle of them sometimes and think about my father buying this land, working this land, deciding quietly and without telling me that it would someday be mine. He was not a man who explained himself. I know that now as a description rather than a complaint. He made his decisions and he kept them, and he trusted that the right things would eventually reach the people they were meant for. He was not wrong. It just took longer than either of us expected. There is one more thing I have not told you, and I tell it not for drama but because it is the part that stays with me most, the part I think about on the porch in the evenings when the light goes gold and the neighborhood gets quiet. When Marcus, the security guard, brought my license back to the truck that night in the Walmart parking lot, he handed it through the window and then paused with his hand on the door frame. "You doing okay?" he asked. Not as a formality. He meant it. I thought about how to answer that honestly. I was 63 years old and sleeping in my truck, and I had lost everything. I had spent 30 years building, and the cold was in my knees, and I had not had a conversation with anyone who actually knew me in 6 weeks. "I've been better," I said. He nodded. He stood there for a moment like he was deciding something. Then he said, "My uncle was in his car for 4 months, lost his business, lost his house. Now he owns 3 of them." He patted the doorframe once. "Just so you know." Then he walked back to his station. I have thought about that moment more times than I can count. Not because of what came after, not because of the phone call and the attorney and the farm and the numbers Howard Bellman read to me in his careful, unhurried voice, but because of what it felt like to be seen by a stranger in a parking lot at 2 in the morning and have that stranger choose, out of everything he could have said or not said, to offer something hopeful. The people who took things from me took them deliberately and with full knowledge of what they were doing. They looked at a man who trusted them and saw an opportunity, and they took it. That is a category of cruelty that I have had to make a kind of peace with. Not because I forgave it, but because carrying it was doing more damage to me than it was doing to them. What I could not have anticipated, and what I think about now, is the other category. The security guard who ran my ID and then came back to tell me something good was waiting for me. The attorney who kept filing requests and sending letters for 4 years because the work was not finished. My father, who never once asked me to deserve what he was leaving me, who just quietly left it and trusted the machinery of the law to eventually put it in my hands. I am 63 years old. I have no interest in pretending the last 2 years did not happen or that they left me unchanged. They changed me in ways I am still discovering. The way a house shows new damage every spring after a hard winter. Small cracks appearing in places you thought were solid. I check them. I address them. I do not pretend they are not there. But I also wake up in the mornings now in a house I own outright, on a street with trees, 40 miles from a farm where 14 wind turbines are turning in the Ohio weather, converting something invisible into something that powers people's homes. My father figured out how to do that. He figured out how to take what he had and turn it into something that kept giving after he was gone. I am still figuring out my version of that. At 63, I have decided that is not a failure of pace, but a matter of appropriate timing. Some things take longer to grow than others. Some inheritances arrive later than expected. The important thing, as Marcus's uncle apparently demonstrated, is to still be there when they do.